This is episode 119 of the Trauma Coaching for Latter-day Saints podcast. I've got to break free. I'm your host, Anita Bremer. I'm a Latter-day Saint mom with a history of trauma. I've figured out how to heal my trauma, and I can help you do the same. Why? Because trauma is one obstacle to gathering Zion. Let's talk about what it takes to truly heal and find lasting joy. Okay, we are on core need number 4 out of 5 in today's episode. Just as a quick recap, the first 3 core needs are connection, attunement, and trust. And each of these core needs builds on the one before it. So, what is autonomy? Autonomy is expressing ourselves, exploring the world, or having freedom to explore the world. And probably the most basic way of thinking about it, it's independence and self-determination. So if this core need of autonomy is not met or not met consistently by a consistent caregiver, you can develop shame around your impulses for autonomy, self-determination, or independence. So I want to talk a minute about how do we actually create autonomy in the first place in an ideal world. So in an ideal world with loving, kind, well-regulated caregivers, the child, now probably in the first, really around age 2, where they start to become more mobile, will first have a desire. And then the mama or the dad, the caregiver, will put a limit in place, right? If the child, in an ideal world, the child would trust their caregiver. If they trust the caregiver, then the child listens, is like, oh, I know you, caregiver, want what's best for me. I trust you. You connect with me. You meet my needs. And so then the child backs away from that limit. And as the child grows, their autonomy and freedom grows. Their caregiver, who truly wants what's best for them, allows them to explore within the limits of what is safe and appropriate, right? So we have a desire, a limit is either put in place or not. If the limit is not put in place, then the child goes and explores, right? But always with the kind of safe base of the caregiver in place. And as soon as they reach sort of, okay, well, that's far enough, then the caregiver puts a limit and then they trust that limit and their autonomy and freedom grows because they get to experience more and more autonomy and freedom. Now, if the caregiver puts a limit in place and the child does not trust the caregiver, these other 3 needs that we've already talked about, connection, attunement, and trust, if those needs are not solidly in place, then the child will say, who are you to give me limits? Right? So you can see how true autonomy is based on trust in the relationship. If the trust isn't there, then any limits that are put in place will be questioned and pushed against. Now, it's also very normal for us to, push against our limits. But if the caregiver is safer, if they're a safe place, if they're bigger and stronger and wiser and also kind, then most likely the child will trust and be happy to trust that limit. So, if we don't have this ideal in place, if we were not allowed to have autonomy, or if the trust, the connection, the attunement, if those were not in place in a really solid way, then we will develop some coping mechanisms, as a result. If we feel like we don't have that safe base, then there are a couple different things that can happen. First of all, we can feel like anything is safe. Like you're not someone to tell me what to do. I'm in charge. I'm going to figure it out. And, young, naive kids that we are, we just feel like everything is safe. That might be like the direction we go, in which case we're probably going to go toward some rebelliousness, some buffering, right? This is kids who probably get into drugs and alcohol because everything feels safe and I get to experiment and explore and everything with no consequence. On the other hand, we might feel like nothing is safe, right? This is what I see mostly with my clients. And this results in this toxic shame and perfectionism, keeping yourself small, not doing things that you really want to do, having social anxiety, seeing yourself only through other people's eyes. Like, what will they think? Will they get upset, right? Like always wondering where the limits are and wanting to stay very far away from them. This could show up as imposter syndrome, never feeling qualified. And it could also show up as your self esteem being based on looks, performance, or achievement. Ding, ding, ding. That is my story, right? I never felt safe with my caregivers. I had maybe too much autonomy, but it felt like nothing was safe. And so I learned to kind of derive that safety from my achievement, not so much my looks or maybe a little bit my performance in terms of performing as a student at school, but really a lot in terms of achievement, right? If I achieve, if I do well, if I get the A's, then I'm safe. Then I'm a good person, right? And then the last way this might show up, especially if well, it could show up in both ways. If everything feels safe and you feel like I can explore everything, no consequences, or if nothing feels safe, is having unhealthy boundaries. Either we will have no boundaries, right? And let people kind of walk all over us and tell us what we think and how we feel and all of that. That's probably the person who feels like nothing is safe. Or if you feel like pretty much everything is safe, you'll set the boundaries yourself. You might even, have lots of boundaries in place because you are trying to control the outer environment. So that is a quick overview of autonomy as a core need. Just as a review, it is based upon the first three core needs, which are connection, attunement, and trust. Trust is based upon connection and attunement, and autonomy is very much based upon trust and feeling that trust in the original caregiver situation. There's a cycle that helps us grow our autonomy. We have a desire, a limit is put in place or not, and we trust the limit or not. And then slowly the autonomy and freedom grows based on our skills and abilities. And we can feel shame over wanting autonomy if that core need was not met. And that might look like um, it could look like rebelliousness and buffering with drugs and alcohol, or having really unhealthy boundaries, or it could, on the opposite end, look like perfectionism and toxic shame, keeping yourself small, having social anxiety, feeling imposter syndrome, or basing your self esteem on looks, performance, or achievement, and also not having healthy boundaries on the other end of the spectrum. Journaling questions. So, the first question, I have two questions for you today. The first question is, reflect on a time that you stood up for yourself in a relationship and you were not rejected. And the second question is, what does shame for wanting to be independent look like in your life? So, just to flesh out that second question a little bit, if you notice, and you may not notice this, but if you notice that you feel bad about yourself in some way because you have a desire to be independent, to be self determining, to feel this freedom, what does that look like? What does it lead to in your life? I just invite you to reflect on that. Next week, we're going to discuss the final core need, which is love and sexuality. I think it's going to be a good one. I've been thinking about it a lot and researching it. So tune in next week. And y'all, it's March. How do we get to March? It's giving me some hope that winter maybe is on its way out, although I know we still have plenty of winter. But it reminds me that my group coaching program, somatically based group coaching called Presence, the doors to the lifetime membership close at the end of the month. So I don't want you to miss out if it's something that you're interested in. I invite you to go to my website, danitabremmer.com, and schedule a free session with me. Let's just do a totally free coaching session. You'll get a little taste of what it's like to be coached by me. And we can talk about the group and the expectations of that group and all of that. So if that is something you're interested in, I invite you to check that out. That's enough for now. And so are you. Thank you for listening, sharing, and leaving a review on the podcast. If you are ready to address your own trauma with my support, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free trauma assessment call. Until next time, go be yourself and follow the spirit.